Yeah, to start the webinar.
You have to hit broadcast.
Let me see. So we're recording.
Do you want me to hit broadcast? I don't know.
Go ahead. I don't have that on my screen. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll give them about a minute, Cindy, to go ahead and get here, and we'll start. How's that?
That's fine.
Super. I do know that you should have a whole class of THL 1000 students from Villanova here tonight.
Okay.
Some extra credit on their midterm exam to come. And
Oh.
they're quite enthusiastic about that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, we'd like to welcome everybody tonight to our webinar. This is going to be the first of two sponsored by the Villanova University Task Force on the Sexual Abuse Crisis in the Catholic Church. My name is Mark Graham. I'm the co-chair of the task force as well as a professor here at Villanova. I wanted to welcome everybody. Before we get going and before I give you a brief bio of Cindy Christian, who's going to be our guest speaker tonight, I want to thank especially three people who have been instrumental in putting this webinar together. First of all, Jean Lochner, who works in the Theology and Religious Studies Department, did a fantastic job of publicizing this and getting the word out. So thanks, Jean. Alvin Wong from our AT department here has been invaluable in terms of getting the webinar up and running and showing us how to do the webinar features. Thirdly, there's Alvin. Thirdly, Sandy Hasink, who might be in the audience tonight, who's also on the task force, who has taken classes in the theology department at Villanova and who was also a pediatrician for probably 30 to 40 years down at DuPont Children's Hospital in Delaware. So thanks, Sandy, for making the connection and taking us to Cindy Christian, okay? Couple other things. Number one, if any of you are interested in learning about the task force on the sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, you're most welcome to go to the president's webpage at villanova.edu. You can click on University Initiatives and the task force bar is listed on the left-hand side. There are a number of past videos from events we had last year, which are free and open to the public. You're welcome to come and take a peek at those and use them in whatever capacity you want. Also, the session tonight is going to be recorded. So any questions you type in, you can type in anonymously, but they will be recorded and people will be able to see those. Okay, let's get to our guest speaker tonight. Cindy Christian, MD, holds the Anthony A. Latini Endowed Chair in the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She's a professor of pediatrics and the Assistant Dean for Community Engagement at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Christian completed her pediatric residency and child abuse pediatrics fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. For more than 2 decades, she has also directed the Child Protection Program. She's a faculty director of the Field Center for Children's Policy, Practice, and Research at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Christian is a past chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Committee on Child Abuse and Neglect, and past chair of the Subboard on Child Abuse and Neglect for the American Board of Pediatrics. From 2010 to 2015, Dr. Christian served as the first medical director for the Philadelphia Department of Human Services, leading the development of policies and strategies to improve the health of Philadelphia's dependent children. Dr. Christian has written and lectured extensively on topics related to all forms of child maltreatment. It is a pleasure and an honor to have Dr. Christian with us tonight. Thanks, Sydney, for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mark and Jean and Alvin and Sandy, if you're in the audience. Thank you all very much. Welcome to my den with my I Love Philly pillow, if you can see that. It really is a pleasure for me to be here. It's so easy to kind of do virtual lectures and talk, but really what I'm hoping this will be, and what we discussed, Mark, was that maybe this will be a conversation. I'm going to start our conversation off, though, with about 20 minutes of information and background, and then hopefully we can open it up. I really don't want to talk at everybody for an hour. I want people to have the opportunity to ask any questions they want. Anything that is on your mind, anything about the topic. I am comfortable answering all questions, and if there's something that I can't answer, I'm a doctor, I'll just make something up. No, I won't do that. I'll let you know if I don't know something. And here's the last thing before I really kind of share my screen and start on my little preamble, my 20-minute talk, is that child sexual abuse is really common, and it very well may be that there are people that are kind of joining us this evening that have been victims of child sexual abuse. And sometimes when you're kind of teaching or talking to an audience, even though you're virtual and I can't see you, I do know that sometimes this triggers things for people. And so if you are somebody who was a victim, you may have disclosed this to someone, you may not have. Just know that there are faculty and people at Villanova that you can reach out to. And at the end, I'll also give you a little bit of information about resources at CHOP that you can reach out to as well. So I just wanted to kind of state that. I am going to share my screen. Hold on, share. And I'm going to pull up my talk. And Mark, that looks good to everybody? Okay, that's our topic, and that's me. And you know those two things. And you know, any good little talk needs some objectives. And really the objectives for this talk are going to be really quite basic. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our definition of child sexual abuse, a little bit about epidemiology, and really how we identify child sexual abuse, some of the indicators that we see when children have been victims. And then what do you do when somebody discloses or you learn about child sexual abuse, a little bit about reporting issues and treatments. And I'm also, because we're at a university setting, I'm going to talk a little bit later on about sex trafficking as well, as kind of like a subset of child sexual abuse. And then just a few words on treatment. I'm not a therapist, but good friends of mine are, and I work with them very closely. So I really like this definition of child sexual abuse, the involvement of children in sexual activities that they can't understand, that they're not developmentally prepared for, that they can't give informed consent for. They can comply, and children comply with lots of things that they don't really understand and cannot really give informed consent because developmentally they're incapable of doing so. And that violates societal taboos. Now, you know, I'm going to talk about child sexual abuse. And when I talk about child sexual abuse, the kids that I take care of are anywhere from, unfortunately, infants and toddlers all the way to adolescents. And as we get to kind of older children and adolescents, some of what we see is date rape, we see sex trafficking, and we see kind of violent physical rape from time to time as well. But when we think about the younger children, it's a very different phenomenon. And so I want to spend a little bit of time kind of with that childhood really issue. There are some important points that everyone should know, that there are many, many activities and things that can constitute child sexual abuse. It doesn't have to be at all. It doesn't have to be kind of a violent physical rape. And in fact, the vast majority of child sexual abuse is not at all about force and power and violence. It is about coercion of children. Most of the time, that coercion is to have the sexual gratification of the adult or the older lesson or the perpetrator kind of met. But there are some cases of child sexual abuse that are perpetrated by other children, where the issue is not so much about the sexual gratification, but sometimes it's because that older child has been a victim himself or herself. And the only way they can kind of get some sense of control back in their lives is to turn around and victimize somebody who's even more vulnerable, younger, incapable of protecting themselves than they are. And, you know, that kind of goes against what you might think, right? Wouldn't somebody who is a victim have empathy for others? Well, that's not about the empathy. It's about they feel so out of control. They feel so terrible that they just need to get some sense of kind of control back. But most of the time, child sexual abuse is very much about the sexual gratification of the perpetrator. And they use their position of power, okay, to coerce and manipulate children to do things that children may not know is wrong until things progress. Sometimes perpetrators use bribery. Sometimes they use coercion. Sometimes they use threats to keep children from disclosing. And you also have to think about children. Children, we love to say as pediatricians, are very egocentric. They think the whole world revolves around them. They think that everything that happens to them happens because of them. So if you are a young child and your parents are separating or divorcing, and you've heard your parents arguing about your care or other things, you may believe that they're getting divorced because of you. If you are a young child who has an uncle or a teacher or a neighbor's friend or another relative or a member of your clergy or anybody who is sexually abusing you, at some point you may recognize that this is not right and this is not good, but you also think that this is your fault and you don't want to get in trouble if you're a child. So imagine, okay, I always say the number one goal for children is not to get in trouble. So if you think you're going to get in trouble, okay, you may not disclose anything. And, you know, perpetrators are sometimes very crafty. They'll start with things that are somewhat innocuous. A neighborhood pedophile might invite kids over to his house, and maybe he has great games and candy. Maybe he has some things that are a little bit illicit. But the kids like going over there because he treats them really well, almost like a peer, like a grown-up. And then he starts to manipulate and starts with some subtle sexual abuse, and things can progress from there. So most of the time, I think of sexual abuse as really a coercion and a manipulation of a child, and very little force is involved. It's interesting that the vast majority of child sexual abuse does not get reported and identified, and perpetrators are not held accountable when children are young. But if you do surveys of adults and ask them about their childhood experiences, what you learn is that child sexual abuse is really very common. And these are just some of the statistics that are out there, and I don't have to read them to you, but it's really quite incredible. There are a series of studies done by Folletti and the Kaiser Permanente system and the CDC that have been done over the last number of decades that looked at adverse childhood experiences, a whole assortment of adverse experiences in childhood. And child sexual abuse was one of the things that they surveyed. And more than 1 out of 5, so more than 20% of adults responded that they had been victims of sexual abuse as a child. And what these series of really important studies have shown is that when children are exposed to especially multiple adverse childhood experiences like sexual abuse and physical abuse and neglect, and parents who have substance abuse issues, when there's domestic violence in the household, when there's a parent who's been incarcerated or mental health problems, when you stack these adverse experiences up in childhood, what happens to the adults is that they get sick. They have significant biological body morbidity. They have higher rates of obesity and heart disease and cancer. and obviously, and mental health problems, and they can't keep jobs. Like, these social experiences as children have profound effects on kind of the biological health and well-being of not only children, but adults as well. Child sexual abuse occurs in all types of families. Now, there are some forms of child maltreatment that are more closely correlated to poverty issues, but not sexual abuse. Sexual abuse happens in the entire span and range of families. And so everybody should just be aware of that. Now, indicators of sexual abuse. Well, let me say this. Children are different. And some children do a fairly good job of compartmentalizing what's happening. There are some children who have this kind of ongoing need to be perfect, because if they don't seem to be perfect after they've been victims of sexual abuse, they think that somebody might catch on that there's something wrong with them. There are other children who act out terribly. There are other children who get depressed. Okay, so there are lots and lots of different indicators that a child may be a victim of sexual abuse. One of the things that is not on here are children who are kind of thriving and doing well, and all of a sudden their school performance drops. They're not doing well. They're again, either acting out or they're withdrawn. So again, you can read all these things. And what I will say is that there's really not any single kind of indicator that a child has been a victim of sexual abuse. Most of the times what we see are children that are telling us that they're stressed, that they're not doing well. And that's a non-specific sign. And what it takes is to work with the child, to sit down with the child, to ensure that child knows that you are a resource for that child, and that child can come to you and talk to you about kind of their stress, and try to get to kind of what the source of stress is. And it could be a million things. It can be like they're stressed because they're bullied at school. It could be they're stressed because they're having family problems. It could be they're stressed because they have a grandparent who's sick. It could be they're stressed because their uncle is sexually abusing them. You just don't know. You just know that children are stressed. Now, some people might say, well, what about children who have hypersexualized behaviors? That to us is a concern. And we see lots of children whose parents bring them to us because they have hypersexualized behaviors. And, there's a range of child behaviors, and child sexual development actually begins very young in childhood. If you've ever been around a 3-year-old, as soon as they discover their genitals, they're fondling themselves continually. They love their genitals because they feel good to them. And that's normal. Okay. And sometimes children are hypersexualized, not because they're victims of sexual abuse, but because they've been exposed to sexuality. And when I was a kid, you never saw any sex on television. That just wasn't a thing. And now, you can't hardly not see sex on television. It's just there for the taking, basically. And so children are really sexually exposed. And this is one of my favorite photos. This is a fellow of mine gave this to me many years ago. And I always say, even the parents who think that they're doing the very best job, protecting their children from all things sexual, like they only, they don't allow them to watch TV without them. They only go to the zoo. You just can't help it. Sex is everywhere. Okay. So sometimes kids are hypersexual, not because they've been abused, but because they've been exposed to sexuality. And it sometimes can be challenging kind of ferreting out kind of which is which and what is what. So here's how we identify children who are victims of sexual abuse. You can see in big, bold font, the biggest and largest way and the most common way by far is that a child discloses to somebody. Sometimes they won't disclose until they feel safe. And that may mean until a perpetrator is out of their household, or until they find somebody who they trust. But by far, the way we know that children are sexually abused is because they tell someone. So you do not need to be kind of a doctor to diagnose child sexual abuse. You do not need to be a trained forensic interviewer or a psychologist. You need to be kind of an adult or an individual who can listen, who can hear, and who can respond appropriately when somebody is making a disclosure. On occasion, we see adults, we see children who are being sexually abused, and an adult or a third party walks in on something. And that is a challenge, brings us different challenges, because sometimes those children are not necessarily ready yet to disclose what's been happening, and they can still be in denial. There are those children that have been victims of sexual abuse who come to us because they have hypersexualized behaviors or other behavioral concerns that parents have. Occasionally, we see children who come to us with anal or genital complaints, but honestly, those are not specific for sexual abuse. Kind of your genitals and are just part of your body. And there are lots of irritations and diseases and infections and lots of problems that can affect your genitals, just like they can affect your throat, like they can affect your arms or your skin or your liver. I mean, it's just a part of the body. So they're not specific. On occasion, we see children who have been sexually assaulted who actually sustained physical injury. And they may come to us with severe physical injuries that are unexplained, or signs of older injury when we examine them. And then on occasion, maybe 3% of the kids, 5% of the children we see who've been sexually abused have sexually transmitted infections. And those are challenging too, because those children usually present with signs of their infection. They may have a vaginal or penile discharge, or difficulty urinating or something. They have symptoms, and we test them and we find that they have a sexually transmitted infection. And sometimes they're not ready to disclose to us. So very often their initial response is, oh, no, I don't know, nothing happened, but something really did happen. We examine like as many children as we can who have been victims of sexual abuse. And the vast majority of them, their bodies are healthy, their exams are normal. And their exams are normal because one, what happened to them may not have ever injured their body in any way. So you can take pornographic photographs of a child. You're not going to find anything on an examination. You can have oral genital contact with a child. You can fondle a child. You can have what we call vulvar coitus, like you can rub a hand or a penis between the labia of a little girl and not through the hymenal tissue into the vagina itself. And there's going to be no injuries. Boys can be sodomized, and their anal exams can be perfectly normal because large pieces of stool can come out and things can go in. So most exams are normal, but we examine all the children for a number of reasons. One, we don't know who's going to have an abnormal exam. And if I find injury on somebody's examination, that's really very strong evidence that they indeed have been a victim of penetrating, injurious sexual abuse. Because I don't know which child may have a sexually transmitted infection or have signs or symptoms of a sexually transmitted infection. And sometimes we identify them simply by our physical examination. Sometimes we do exams because there was an acute assault and we have to get forensic evidence collection. So we'll do exams then. But I think the most important reason to do exams on these children is because oftentimes when children are a little older, they have a lot of fear about what has happened to them and what that means to their reproductive health, to their physical health, to their well-being. And whether children are verbal or pre-verbal, parents often have always, I should say, have those concerns as well. And so families are often very ambivalent when they come to us. They're nervous, they're scared, they don't know kind of what this is going to mean to their child long term. And when we can reassure families and children that their bodies are fine, it is a huge weight taken off of families' shoulders and parents' shoulders, and like to reassure parents that their bodies are good and that they're going to be healthy and their reproductive systems are fine. When we can say that, we say that, okay? And that is therapeutic. And that is part of, I think, the healing process for many children and families. Now, if somebody discloses to you, and that person could be a friend, it could be a student, it could be a family member, it could be anybody. Okay. Try not to react with like disgust or anger or shock. Now, you may be shocked, okay? And you can pause and you can try to collect yourself, okay? And it's always appropriate to say to the child, okay, let's sit down and let's talk about this. Okay, tell me what you want to tell me, and I am here to listen to you. Okay, and I will help you in any way that I can. You shouldn't force a child to talk. You shouldn't ask a child why. Why did this happen? Why did you let this happen? How did you let this happen? Like don't put the blame on the child. It's not the child's fault. Okay, these pedophiles are really, they're crafty. Okay, and and they have lots of tricks in their book. I mean, we had a pediatrician in Delaware who was a pedophile, and he was the pediatrician for lots and lots of community, families, police officers and teachers, and I mean, like the kind of salt of the earth citizens. And he would take children after their exams and take them to his special barn for them to choose a toy, and he would videotape himself sexually assaulting the children. Okay, that's a pediatrician. I mean, it's disgraceful, and I think he's in jail forever, which isn't appropriate. But again, like, they are crafty. So let children talk in their own words, but do not interview them. Okay, this is what you should do. Okay, you should first support the child, listen and support their feelings. And then, whether you're a mandated reporter or not, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, you should make a report. And the easiest way to make a report in Pennsylvania is to call Childline. Okay, it is the central system in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, where all reports of child maltreatment go. Now, not all reports of child maltreatment will be investigated by kind of the child welfare system, the DHS system, the CPS system, we call it Child Protective Services system. But all allegations of sexual abuse that involve a family member or somebody who is responsible for the well-being of the child, that will be investigated by kind of our child welfare system. But also every case of child sexual abuse will be investigated by the police, because it's against the law to sexually abuse a child. So all of them will be investigated by the police, and many of them, but not all, will also be investigated by child welfare. Again, for the reasons I just gave, encourage families to see a physician, and mental health treatment. Okay, that is incredibly important, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end, including the importance of supports for families. And then, parents, like, just imagine the devastation of a parent who learns that their child has been a victim of sexual abuse. Like, you want to protect that child, and you want to nurture them, and you want to, like, make sure that they're going to be okay. One of the best things that you can do is just to kind of keep going in your family. It's going to be intrusive. You're going to have to go and talk to people, and it's embarrassing to have to talk to multiple people. And we've tried to develop child advocacy centers so kids don't have to keep saying the stories over and over and over and over again. And we've done a really great job in this country kind of developing those CACs. But make the child go to school, okay? Make the child do their homework. Don't eat dessert for dinner every night. Like, just keep the routines, because children need that stability as well. Let me talk a little bit about the commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking of minors. And basically, it's defined very simply as any exchange of a sexual act for goods involving a minor. And there's both domestic minor sex trafficking and international minor sex trafficking. And you might think that what you hear about is the international minor sex trafficking, but the truth is that 83% of victims are United States citizens and permanent residents. It's not children. Sex trafficked children are not children from other countries who are brought here. It's our children. And our adolescent doctors, when we see adolescents, we always kind of do I call it a SHADS evaluation. Some people call it a HEADS evaluation. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And we screen every adolescent kind of for kind of just their social lives and what they're doing and what risks they're taking, et cetera, because that's a normal part of adolescent development. And then I'm going to talk a little bit how we kind of get at some of these more difficult questions. So our heads questions would kind of, you can see what it stands for. We want to think about, for adolescents, their household dysfunction, whether they're in school and how they're doing. If you're thinking about sex trafficking, students who have, or adolescents who have extra pocket money, they have kind of fancy shoes, they have fancy bags and purses, or they have extra money, they have multiple cell phones, things that you wouldn't expect this adolescent to have. You should start thinking about, where's that money coming from? We always ask about kind of their peers and drugs and alcohol, et cetera, suicide, depression. Now, this is a nice schema that you can use. So we can start with kind of broad and general knowledge, okay? Do you know about kids having sex for something they want or need? Okay, and you can see, if they say no, then you could come back to that at a later time. If they say yes, you can ask an adolescent, well, have any of your friends ever been asked to have sex for something they wanted or needed? Okay, if they say no, again, you're going to keep screening these kids. This is also a way to tell adolescents that you're someone that they can talk to if they need to talk to someone. And then if they say yes, this has happened to their friends, then you can ask them, has anyone ever asked you to have sex with another person? Or has anyone ever taken sexual pictures of you and posted these pictures kind of on the internet? And has anyone ever asked you to have sex in exchange for something you wanted or needed? And if they say no, well, you know that they're really at high risk because this is happening in their circle. And if they say yes, then you need to deal with that. You need to report that. You need to support them. You need to get them kind of to some help. Now, all of us who work with children in any professional capacity, whether you are a university professor, you are a coach, you are a Sunday school teacher, you are a physician, we are mandated reporters under Pennsylvania law. And what that means is that if a child comes before us, or if we learn about, okay, a child who may be a victim of sexual abuse, because part of the church scandal was that kind of sometimes the clergy was not reporting because the child didn't come before them, even though they knew about it, which is really like bad, okay? If you know of a child, or if a child comes before you and you are suspicious, you have reason to suspect they are a victim of any form of child maltreatment, you have a mandate to report that. Now, I do this work all the time. I don't report every child who comes in front of me. I have to have a reason to suspect. And all of us have a slightly different threshold based on our upbringing, our beliefs, our religious belief. But there is no religion that says sexual abuse is okay, okay? Or kind of how, again, I think just, kind of what our belief system is. But I will tell you that if you believe that a child may be a victim of sexual abuse, you have a mandate to do something about that, and not just say, well, it's okay, we won't let it happen again, okay? And you don't have to report what you know to be true, you report what you suspect to be true. When kids disclose, there are a lot of problems, okay? Sometimes they recant their disclosure because the systems are complicated. The child may fear consequences. The perpetrator may have told the child, if you tell anyone, I'm going to kill X, Y, or Z, I'm going to kill your pet, nobody's going to believe you, they're going to take you away from your family. So the child may not be believed. The child may have disclosed before and not been believed. So, a family member may have to leave the home. Somebody may go to jail. You have to talk to the police. All of these terrible things because you've disclosed something. And then finally, I just want to mention something about therapy. So I work with wonderful therapists and who do trauma-focused CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And what is important is that they start the trauma-focused CBT without the child, that their first sessions are with the parents alone, not the offending parent if the offender was a parent, because parents are often devastated and they need space to talk about how they miss this. What does this mean to my family, et cetera. And then our therapists work with children kind of over a 12 to 16 session model where they do psychoeducation, they kind of expose the child does some narrative, and really the progress that children make to understand what has happened to them and to process this is really quite amazing. This is our resource at CHOP. Our telephone number is 215-590-4923. You can connect with someone. If you know of someone who needs some help, there's always somebody that you can reach out to. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I hope that was, let's see, a little bit over, but okay, I want to open it up if there are any questions. Mark, I hope that was what you were all looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. That was insightful. It was informative. We appreciate that. We do have a question from an anonymous attendee. I'll go ahead and read that for you.
Mm-hmm.
This question, is there an identified, well-supported multicultural approach to recognizing or responding to child sexual abuse, or does it seem to be universal?
So I don't know of any specific like cultural approach that would be different, although I do recognize that child abuse around the world looks very, very different. Now, and let me say, as I'm thinking about this very interesting question, like culture around the world is very different. I mean, if we think about female genital mutilation, it's nothing that we would ever ascribe to here in the United States, but in other some other cultures, that is kind of some of their normal practices. If we think about the killing of young women who may have affairs, like, or may have premarital sex. I mean, so like there are many different cultures that look at sex very, very differently. I don't know many cultures where it is okay to sexually abuse a young child. I do think that kind of, no matter where you go, there are children's rights advocates around the world who are working to protect children from these kinds of abuses. And I think some of them have more challenges than we have even in our country, where kind of we're open to the idea, where we have systems in place to protect children. Not every country has systems in place either to protect children. So I hope that answers the question. I hope I've done it justice.
Cindy, I have a question about pedophiles, only because I've actually known a couple pedophiles in my life, and they were both back when I was studying to be a Catholic priest. So I was a seminarian, and one of my fellow seminarians at that time, I had no idea, in fact. When I found it out, I was completely stunned. But it turns out that once he was ordained a priest, he went back to his diocese in Iowa, and he was taking boys on camping trips, and he was abusing them during camping trips. And the thing about this guy is that he was an upstanding member of the church, of his community. He came from a fantastic family, super bright, super personable, suave, debonair, everything like that, right? Nobody ever would have suspected that he was molesting boys on these camping trips, right? The other pedophile I knew, I was doing a prison chaplaincy at the Maryland House of Correction, and I got to know a pedophile well, and part of what he was going through was essentially coming clean and confessing his sins and doing some kind of atonement for that. But as he was telling me his story, I realized that this guy was totally cunning. He was very crafty. He was highly intelligent. He would spend years grooming children so he could eventually have children in private so he could do what he wanted with them. And here's the thing, my overwhelming impression of pedophiles is that they're very, very good at what they do, which is molesting kids. And I don't know if you deal with the whole because I know you deal with the aspect of treating victims and detecting sexual abuse, but I don't know if you could tell us anything about pedophiles and things to look for in terms of people who might be abusing children.
Well, first of all, I don't have a profile. I don't know that there is really a profile. Mm-hmm. And I don't work with kind of the pedophiles themselves. And I think that there's a lot of controversy about whether you can even really successfully treat pedophiles and make them not pedophiles. I do think that there are some people whose kind of sexual orientation is towards children. I mean, I don't know how you how you change that in an individual. It's kind of like if you are, you know, born with different kind of sexual attractions, you know, I think what I know is that you can't change the way that you're born, but unfortunately for these people, it's dangerous to children's well-being. But as you were talking to me, it made me, first of all, like what you just told me about these guys is just so classic. I mean, it's just so classic. But here's how we combat that. Okay. Now, doesn't always work, but if you're a parent of a young child, here's the first thing you do. You give words to the children's genitals, okay? Vagina and penis, those are good words. It's just like, look, ear, nose, belly button, vagina, penis, okay? Because often, I always joke that when I would sometimes say to families, you know, because I would want to use to the child the words that the family uses for their genitals, and families make up all kind of crazy names. And sometimes I would say, what word do you use for the child's genitals? And they would just stare at me like this. Right? And I'd be like, okay, there is no word. Now, like if you don't, and it's really sending the child a message. And the message is, this is so taboo, I'm not even going to name it. It's all like Voldemort, okay? It's like she who cannot be named, the vagina. It's like, it's like that taboo, okay? So the first thing you do is you just make it a normal part of the body. The child's 1 and 2 years old. That's just another part of the body. And then you repeatedly, in an age and developmentally appropriate way, tell the children 2 things. The one is that their bodies are their own, and that nobody should ever force you to do something with your body that you don't want to do. Now that's too sophisticated for a 2 or a 3-year-old. But if a child doesn't want to hug and kiss every, you know, great uncle they've never met, so be it, okay? And that there are areas in your body that are private areas, and those are the areas under your bathing suit. I kind of like that, right? For girls, kind of the breasts and the genitals. For boys, kind of the genital area. And then here's the other and even more important message that children need to learn as they're growing up, is that there are no secrets from your parents. No matter what it is, okay, you can always come to us with anything, because we are here for you, and we will listen, and we're here to protect you from the world. We're here to protect you from everything. And that's not like, you know, the old fashioned, okay, sit your son down and have the birds and the bees talk with him. That's an ongoing life process of talking to children and reassuring them and behaving in ways that your children always feel like you are their resource, that you are the person that they can come to for everything and anything. You know, I've seen a lot of kids whose parents were victims of sexual abuse, and then their children are victims of sexual abuse. And very often they would come and they would tell me that every time the child went out of the house and they came back, they looked at their genitals, okay? Like they checked them to see if anyone sexually abused them. Well, like that is just kind of completely misplaced, like, you know, surveillance. I mean, it's just not, I just told you, everybody's got a normal exam, even though they're sexually abused. But the other thing is these women often would like let the children go with the person who was sexually abused them a generation ago. And I used to think to myself, like, what? And to be honest, I would think like, what's the matter with this mother? How could you do that, right? But here's what I've learned over my career. That's a bad question. It's not what's the matter with her. It's what's happened to this mother, right? Because she's not thinking clearly. She's probably traumatized herself. And I often will say to mothers, like not every day, not every parent, but I just can sometimes tell, and I will ask a parent, I'll say, you know, have you ever been sexually abused? Were you ever sexually abused when you were a child? And very often the answer is yes. And I can't even count anymore how many times I'm the first person this adult woman ever told. They never told anybody. And they are devastated and traumatized because their child has now been sexually abused. Okay. It's because they've never dealt with their own trauma. Okay. And that's why we start with parents, because they often have similar traumas as their children do.
If anybody else has any questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A down below on the bottom of your screen. I know that Walter had a question. Walter, if you can type that in on the question and answer feature, that'd be fantastic. Okay. We've got John, I don't have that on my screen. Would you mind reading that for Cindy? Cindy, another question came in, but I'm not quite getting it.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly. So it says, from a professional standpoint, how would you recommend educating children that you, the medical professional, school counselor, teacher, etc., are a safe person to talk to if they are unsafe, specifically in situations where the child is being abused by a parent, sibling, or other family member?
So if you are, well, first of all, there are lots of ways that you can convey that you are a safe person. You can put, if you're a teacher, you can put posters up in your classroom about, everybody is safe in this classroom, no violence in this classroom, no, you can have messages. In medicine, we often have like little buttons, like, right? You may have, a button about nonviolence or about LGBT rights or whatever it is, to just to give like nonverbal cues to people that you are somebody who can listen. And then you can easily say to children, you know what, kids, okay, if you're a teacher in a classroom, and first of all, they have lots of programming where they do some work with children around kind of protection. Although I do have this thought that it's sad that you have to like protect children and prevent abuse by like, making the child be the prevention part. It's like you need to do things with the adults, especially with men. Okay, so, because they are the most common perpetrators. Not that women don't perpetrate, but men do. But you can have a teacher say to children, you know what, class, I am here for you. So if there's anything you ever want to tell me or share with me, I would love to hear it. If it's good, I would love to hear it. If it's bad, I would love to hear it. And if you are not feeling safe in the class, let me know. If you are worried about something at home, you could always let me know too. I am here to help you. And, okay, we're all here to learn together. So if you're, if I'm a teacher, I may be looking at a kid who can't concentrate, right? They can't be doing their math because they're worried about going home and being exposed to someone who may harm them again. Right? So like as a teacher, you also want to kind of look out for those things, and you can ask children, is everything okay? Is everything okay in class? Right? Is anybody, hurting you, or is anybody bullying you? And you can ask, is everything okay in your neighborhood? Is it a good neighborhood? Is everything okay at home as well? I mean, just, don't lead children, but you can just ask them questions.
Okay, Gene, I can't see the third question. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
I have it, yep. So if your child has had issues and then out of control in teen years, a suicidal and children's hospital recommends a mental hospital. Is this safe when rumors are there is abuse in places that kids go to for help? How can you make sure your child is safe there?
So my experience is that there are children who are sexually abused in out-of-home placements, but I don't know many children who are abused in a psychiatric institution. Hospitals, well, first of all, I also want to say this, like when I first started doing this work, and I've been a pediatrician at CHOP for 35 years. So when I first started doing this work, I would just go in and examine kids by myself all the time. Like that was my routine. And when kids got a little bit older, I always say to them, I still do you want your mom in the room with you, or do you want her to wait outside? And when they start going through early puberty, they usually want their parent outside because they want privacy. And I would examine the kids by myself all the time. I would never do that anymore. I always have a chaperone in the room. And I think it gives the parent some reassurance, and it gives me reassurance too, right? That nobody's going to claim that I, harmed them in any way during my exam. Although, I don't worry about that because I would never harm any of my patients. But, it's protection. It's protection for everybody. And if you have a child who needs psychiatric hospitalization, I don't think worrying about the fact that they could be sexually abused in the hospital would be anything that even would occur to me. Okay, it just would not really cross my mind. There are usually lots of faculty and individuals. I can't tell you that it never happens, but when kids need psychiatric hospitalization, usually it's because they really need psychiatric hospitalization. And I do think that upstanding kind of hospitals have things in place to ensure, to the very best of their ability, children's safety.
Jean or John, do you have any more questions?
There aren't any other questions in the Q&A right now, no.
Okay, good. Cindy, this was very informative. We appreciate your time and energy. Thanks for all the fine work you do. I'm just amazed at how much I learned tonight. So
thank you. It was so nice kind of meeting you and meeting Jean and meeting the team. And I hope that everybody learned a little something tonight.
Yep.
Right? You should learn something every day. That's my motto. Learn at least something every day. So if I've taught somebody something tonight, then I've done a good job. So it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And anytime you need some help, feel free to reach out.
Super. Thanks so much, Cindy. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care. Hey, Jean.
Yes.